Okay.
Hello, my name is William A. Adams,
And I'm Marisela Cerda.
and this is the Techquity Podcast.
So William, I have a question for you.
What's the question, Marcella?
What do middle-aged tech chica and a Black software engineer have in common?
This podcast, obviously. So we started this Techquity Podcast because we want to talk about technology and how it relates to our respective tribes and how people can get an equity share of technology. And we'll talk about that later. But today, this first one, we want to talk about ourselves, right?
Yeah. Today, with this being like our kickoff podcast, we thought it might be kind of fun to jump into some of our past and then talk about what we want to do with this podcast in the future.
Yeah, so you want me to go first? Tell my life story in a nutshell?
You and I have known each other for a long time, but I think that it's going to be helpful for our audience if they hear about us a little bit so that they get to know, what our perspective is. And then when they hear us talk about the technology, it makes sense. So yeah, why don't you go first? I'll go second. But tell the audience a little bit about your early childhood, what meaningful things you did that led to your career in computing. I mean, between you and I think we have probably over 50 years of experience in the tech industry,
yes.
something like that. So let's start with how you got into it, and then I'll go.
Yeah, so for me, I grew up in this place called Placentia, California, which is kind of nestled between the high-tech companies of Rockwell International and Hughes Aerospace and the strawberry and orange fields of Orange County. And there is Placentia right in the middle, just a tiny community of migrant workers, Black families, a lot of people from the military, ex-military, just working class people, basically. And my start in tech didn't really start until I was about 12 years old. But when I was younger, my father was a typewriter repairman. So I was, at that time, we didn't have personal computers. So I was born in 1964, right? So this really predates computers. But I was around mechanical things. And for some reason, I was just one of those kids that was like, I had an erector set and a chemistry set and a physics set. So I was kind of science oriented from the beginning. And then when I was around 12, my uncle said, hey, I've got this computer that I don't need. And there was this thing called a Commodore PET. And this kind of predates the Apple I and the Apple II, but it was around the era of when those things were coming out. So to have my uncle give me this computer, and at that time I was probably the only kid in my block who had one, was the start. He just kind of said, here you go, gave me some books and said, good luck. And I just kind of taught myself how to program. And for me, I was a precocious little kid. We did sports and all that, but I could have this thing. I was very shy, so I could make this computer do stuff, and be a companion, if you will. And so I just started. I started writing assembly language programs on a Commodore PET. That turned into a Commodore 64 later. And then eventually I went off to college at UC Berkeley to really learn how to be an electrical engineer. And then at Berkeley, we learned things like Pascal programming. That's where C programming. We learned about operating systems like Unix and things like that. So that kind of furthered me along in my tech journey. And then in 1984, my brother and I started a company called Atomation. And we just started doing software. So the earliest days were software to do printing labels for a company that put labels on envelopes and sent letters out to their customers. One thing led to another, and we did a lot of work with the early Macintosh, I was selling them at UC Berkeley out of the computer store. And later when Steve Jobs started a company called Next, we said, hey, let's do stuff with Next computers because Steve Jobs is exciting. And that was in the early 90s. So we had a journey with Next computers for a while. And then eventually Next went back to Apple, if you will. Steve Jobs went back to Apple. And in 1998, I went to Microsoft. In my earliest days at Microsoft, I worked on this thing called XML, the creation of it, the dissemination of it. I worked on data access things and all sorts of stuff. And from 98 until just last year, 2022, I was at Microsoft. But that's really my earlier career. And the funny thing about my early career is being Black in tech in Silicon Valley during that era. My brother and I were a rarity. We were so rare that recently the Computer History Museum did an audio expose on us. So 7 hours of interview is at the Computer History Museum in Silicon Valley, and you can hear about all the gritty details of our earliest history in an audio format. So that's me in tech. I got into it when I was pretty young. And I've been programming, I'm 58 now, so I've been programming for 45 years, which is quite a long time. So not all of it commercially, but I've been programming since I was a wee little lad, and it's been a minute. So that's the short story of my 45 years in tech.
Yeah, we should definitely put your the link to that interview.
Computer History Museum.
Yeah, in the show notes, because I think there might be people who want to hear, the longer version of the story.
Yeah,
which can go on for hours, but yeah,
it went on for 7 hours.
45 years of programming is quite impressive. A lot of people give up way before then. So
and I'm still programming today. It's just in me.
Yeah, I've admired that about you ever since I met you, that it doesn't matter what job you're in, you've always been programming in, either because it's your job or in the background.
Yeah, always there. It's like breathing and exercise, right? It's like,
yeah.
Well, what about your story?
Yeah, I think I always start my story when I tell it with my parents, because because of their struggle more than my struggle, but also because it just had so much influence on my life. So my dad, I'll start with my dad. He came in the 1950s under the Settle Worker Program, which was a program that the United States had that brought farm workers. A lot of people forget about that back in the day, they used to have visas just for farm workers to come every year and stay and work. And so he got in on that program, and it's last year, which I think was 1959. Was really young, sort of struggled, came up through California that way, and just, was pretty much working for dollars a week. And then ended up meeting my mom, whose family had already immigrated to Northern California in the 1930s, and had been also in farm work. And so that's how they met. And my mom, being just one of these people who was just not willing to accept spending her life doing something she didn't love, went to school, got into the Cal State in Northern California called Chico State, by way of the community college system in California, which I think you and I both can attest to. California, since we both were raised there, having a really good, at least a really broad reaching public school system, beyond 12th grade, right? Or beyond high school. And they try at least to make education really accessible. So the whole point of them having the community college and the Cal State in Northern California was to educate the sons and daughters of farmers, farm workers. And so then, that's kind of that's my background. And then I grew up in Northern California. Couldn't be further from where you grew up, which is in, the Los Angeles area in Southern California. It's all small. farm towns, very rural. I had a great childhood. My parents were always making us like home cooked Mexican food. And I had, you know, very caring, loving friends. What happened though was as I was growing up, you know, I had this mom who was very much a like, I don't fit the mold. I do what I want. I go to school. I become a, you know, she becomes a teacher and decides that, you know, she's going to build a life different from the one that her family had. And I think in a similar way, I think I was similar, right? I was living in this small town in Northern California, and I could just see like from that vantage point at that time, which was like the late 80s, early 90s, what was going on in the Silicon Valley. And even though like where I live, nobody talked about the Silicon Valley, honestly, nobody talked about it at all. I was hyper aware that like computers were coming, they were starting to sell them at Sears, you know, we were finally getting like user interfaces like in the early 90s. We went from like everything like DOS based, like input based, you know, interfaces to Windows. I remember asking my mom if she could buy me a Windows machine. I was around 14 and she was like, yeah, it seems educational, because she was such a big, you know, proponent of education and an educator herself. I ended up with a computer around the age of 14, and I didn't know really what to do with it, but I knew that like I could connect it to the thing called the internet. And so even though I lived in this tiny town, they had created like a county internet provider for the schools. So actually for the school system, they had decided, you know, we're going to create a connection so that the elementary schools can dial in and connect with each other. And this is like 94, I think, 93, 94, maybe 95. I don't remember exactly. And so I, you know, got that machine and I called the county. I created a dial-up connection. I hogged the phone line. This is when you had to either be like on the computer or on your phone. If anybody remembers that period of time. And I got online, you know, and I was just, I think at the time I was just so impressed, like awed with just by the fact that this technology even existed. And I wanted to be part of the industry that was creating this and creating this momentum and doing these things. And for me at that time, that was in the Silicon Valley. So I went to college. I got my degree in computer science at Chico State, which was, you know, local. And I happened to meet a woman named Norma Abe. She was this engineer from Hewlett Packard who just took it upon herself to go out and recruit women and students of color into Hewlett Packard. And that was around 97. So way ahead of her time, I think, in terms of equity and inclusion in technology, in the field of technology. I went to the Silicon Valley to work at Hewlett Packard in my freshman year at college as an intern. It was pretty tough because I had no idea what I was doing. They asked me to like write some C code, you know, and I had to create a program in C that was previously written in COBOL. I knew neither of those languages, but I got through it. And I think that a lot of what I enjoyed and what I found that I enjoyed about computing and computer science was just the challenge of solving a problem. Like for me, it felt a lot like a math problem. It felt a lot like, well, it's like a combination of like math and like writing and logic and trying to figure out, you know, how to get the system to do what you want it to do. So I just really enjoyed that part of it. I would say that, you know, I guess to kind of end like how I got to where I am today. So I finished school and I ended up getting a job at Microsoft right out of college. And I ended up moving to the Seattle, Puget Sound area. So I didn't end up in the Silicon Valley like I had imagined myself to have, you know, that's where I thought I was going, but I actually ended up in Seattle. At the time it was around 2000, early 2000s. And even though I'm like Latina, so tend to be like in the 2%, 3% range of the population within tech. What I would say is that, by chance, I'd met a lot of great people who support, like yourself, who supported me, and who really helped me kind of face whatever challenges I came across, based on my identity. And yeah, I've had this opportunity to work on all kinds of things within the tech space. I've been at Microsoft over 20 years now, and I've done a lot of program management related to like services, both internal, external, how we run the company, and also products for customers. And I've done a ton of just like tech business management, management in tech. And I've been mostly on the, like, unlike you were mostly on the developer side, I was more on the program manager side. So, I'm excited about this podcast because I think you and I complement each other really well. We kind of show the two different sides of how you can engage and be in tech. And I think we all sort of land in a place that really fits our own like skills and personalities, right? So while I still enjoy sort of geeking out on certain elements of tech, I also enjoy the strategic side, which is thinking about like, what are we going to build, and what are the customers' needs, and just, is this thing going to make money? Like that side, I really enjoy today. So yeah, that's been like my career. And I think one thing we both of us really want is for this podcast to make it possible, to help other people feel like it's possible for them to participate.
Yeah. Yeah, as I'm listening to your story and comparing to my own, it's kind of funny. There's some parallels and some divergences, right? It's like, well, you're Mexican or Latina, and I grew up in a Mexican neighborhood, but I'm not, I'm Black,
Yeah.
So I didn't experience the farm workers directly, but they were all around us. And we would oftentimes play in the fields that our neighbors were farming, and here I was, this geeky little kid, equal parts athlete and shy guy at home. By day I'm playing baseball, and by night I'm hacking on a computer that none of my friends knew anything about.
Yeah.
I think there's those interesting things, and like you said, there's I'm pure geek. I'm pure code. And certainly through running a business and whatnot, I've got that strategy side, but I prefer to code.
Yeah.
And I think what's really important, and something we can emphasize as we talk, is the fact that it takes all kinds, right? It's hard to run a successful tech company by just being a coder.
Yeah.
Or just being a strategist. It's like, well, those two need to meet, right? Someone's got to know about, well, how do you actually run a viable business, rather than, you can't just say code it and they will come. That rarely works. So I think it's a great compliment, like you said, to have these different perspectives and different experiences. Also was thinking, it's like, oh yeah, we both started at Microsoft at almost the same time. Maybe I'm 2 years ahead of you there. But I had a company before that, and you were doing the college thing, and here we are at the same place, right? Yeah. You're still at the company, and I've recently left. But we had similar journeys of 20 plus years at that company at around the same time, right?
Yeah.
So my hope for the podcast is, as you said, is I've done a lot of public speaking and been on other people's podcasts, and what I find is that people are wanting to hear just the truth, how a different perspective, not the whitewashed, polished, corporate objectified perspective, but just hey, here's a place where you can ask those questions that you have is tech a meritocracy? Can I just put my head down and focus and I'll do good? How hard is it to advance? How do you keep up with tech? When is it time to switch careers or groups, or how do you chase technology? How do you crystal ball the future in tech? All of that stuff that if you're in different communities, you might get it naturally, but if you're in one of our communities, it may not come to you at all, right? So my hope for the podcast is to be able to create that space where we ask some really challenging questions and have answers and have solutions for people, where we can say, yeah, what about AI? And it's like, yeah, what about it? Here's an opinion, and here's the thing that you can do. That's my hope for the podcast, is that we can, through our own experiences and by having other people come in and by doing our own research, show people this is what tech's all about. Now, I did want to say one more thing about that word tequity, because we said, hey, this is a tequity podcast. And I want to delve a little bit deeper into that, because it's something that's really important to me in my own mission. And what it is, over the last year or two, I've been trying to think about what is the single word or a single phrase I can convey to people, that technology is a tool that can help them with intergenerational wealth development and improving their community. And I centered on this word tequity. And what it means to me is, by having an equity share of technology, that is the tide that's lifting all boats, technology. When you look around the world today, all the wealth creation, all the advancements, it's all around technology. And if you want to be in a position where you're lifting your community up, it's by being an owner of technology, not just being a consumer of technology. And that ownership piece is the equity, meaning I have stock, I own patents, I run my own business. It's that equity. We all have phones, so we're all consumers of technology. We all use ATM machines. That's consuming technology. You don't get rich off of that, and you don't have intergenerational wealth because of that. Someone else does. So if our tribes, want to have intergenerational wealth development, we need to own the technology, and that's what tequity is all about. So, and how do you do that, right? That's what I want to talk about.
Right. How do you get your piece of the pie?
Yeah, how do you get your piece of the pie? How do you make your own pie?
How do you make your own pie? Yeah, right. In this space that sometimes can feel so like closed off and impossible to get into if you're not already in it, right? Or you're not already starting from some point of, like, your parents were engineers. Like, there's so many times when I was at work and I would, inquire about someone's background, and they're like, oh, my dad was an engineer. Often it was the dad, not the mom, but sometimes the mom. My parents were college professors, or my dad, and I was just like, yeah, not even
me.
Yeah, my mom was like a second grade teacher, so but still, like, so we had that advantage. She was college educated. My dad was just a really hard worker, and super, just very much like go to school. Like, he was just very much on this like go to school train. And so I had that advantage, and being in California, that's another advantage. But like, even then, I think the only reason I even went into tech at the time was because I was so naive. Like, I didn't even stop to think, like, how am I going to get a job, or what am I going to do once I have this degree? None of that crossed my mind. And so I definitely want it to be for people to see that it is possible. There's lots of ways to participate, to get your share of the equity, whether that be you do it as an entrepreneur, or you do it by joining another organization, right? And because there's just lots of different paths. And then also, the other thing that I think I would add to everything you said, which is all we're on the same page about, is insights. Like, we want to really help take our skills and our knowledge that we've developed over the last 30 years and 20 years and say, like, apply that, to some of the things that are going on today and the things that we think are going to be coming in the future, things like AI, what's going on with security and privacy, especially data privacy. How do you think about all these services online? Should you use them? Should your kids use them? Right? Like, I think about that a lot. Is the tech actually helping humanity, or is it not helping humanity? I think these are all questions, that we ask ourselves, especially being in this field. And I think you and I kind of have this unique, having had all the years of experience, we have a unique ability to kind of go deep on them, and ask, and explore some difficult, or just explore these topics kind of in depth,
Yeah.
and let everybody else hear that, so that they can also learn from it and apply it to their own lives, and think about it, about what they hear in their own journey and how they can apply it, wherever they happen to be.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation, because I think when you and I do talk about these things, it can get deep pretty quick. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about in the following episodes. I'll start with one that I'm actually really interested in, which is about employment, actually, and how the employment landscape is going to change, particularly in the face of the emergence of more AI tools, AI buzzwords, but AI tools and remote work and all these other sorts of things, and what that means to us in terms of how do you get a job, what kind of job is it, and what do the structures look like? What kinds of things what things are exciting for you for our future episodes?
Yeah, so for sure, that topic of AI and jobs and how do you learn it? Like, for me, I'm definitely a learner. I love to explore ways to pick up knowledge and information quickly, because I don't have a lot of time. So for anybody out there who, like, wants to learn how to learn something fast, hopefully we'll be able to talk about that as well, because there's a lot of great ways out there. And then I think the other thing for me that privacy, like data privacy, is always like a fascinating topic for me, because we give away so much. And I think to think about, what does that mean for us, to be giving away so much of our lives and our data online? What are we getting in return? And really ask ourselves tough questions like, is it worth it? Is it worth it, knowing what some of these technologies sort of manifest, on a larger scale? And is there a different way to participate, and be present and have your voice heard, or get a job, right, or whatever it is, make connections, stay connected, without giving it all away? So I definitely want to talk about that. Security, I think, is something that's really top of mind. All the hacking, data, right? Like, how do you protect your data? What data do you even want to protect? All these things are really important. And I think there's a whole sector there of work, that if it's something that calls to people, I would say go get it, because it's gonna be. I mean, now that there's value in data, well, now there's lots of thievery in data.
Thievery in data. Yeah.
So, yeah, where in the past you might have been like, I'm gonna go, if you were into security, you might have been like, I'm gonna go be a police officer. Well, maybe now you should be like, I'm gonna go be a data security expert.
I'm going to be a cyber cop.
Cyber cop. Yeah, exactly. And it's a different version of basically the same job, from the that maybe it would have been something we would have been interested in 30, 40 years ago. But today, that version of it is very, if you want to be in a place that's going to help your family more, I think you need to look at digital, and you need to look at what's going on in the world, in technology, because otherwise, you're gonna. I think my prediction, right, is you're gonna find yourself in an industry that is, often kind of called dying. And so we want to kind of look at that, like, what are the dying industries, and kind of replace them. So folks, and then what skills and knowledge do you need to put yourself in a position to take advantage of that?
Yeah, and speaking of the dying industries, I mean, it's certainly an exploration of, well, white collar jobs are not immune to automation. You know, we oftentimes think of automation taking over like factory jobs or farm jobs and whatnot. It's like, well, white collar jobs that we've all enjoyed for the last 30 or 40 years are not immune to automation either. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for humanity? And what are we going to do next if we're not doing these jobs? You know, it's like, well, how do we apply our humanity? And that's a deep topic that I really want to get into. It's like, how is it even more important going forward to look at things like philosophy and psychology and religion and all these other things that we typically don't really look at, right?
Yeah.
How do they apply? You know? So, well, I'm looking forward to all of those conversations. So I'm glad we started, you know, and I'm glad I have you as a partner to explore all these things. And I think for me, that about does it.
Yeah, same here. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to, to join you on this podcast. I'm really excited about us working together on it. And I can't wait to hear what people think about our first episode, and then, in the future, the topics we explore, because it's definitely that audience inputs that's going to make a difference and help us take this where it needs to go.
All right, then. Until next time.
All right.
See you
Ciao.
later.
Bye.